Dame Ellen MacArthur is a record-breaking round-the-world sailor, writer, and founder of 2 charities. Ellen first hit the headlines in 2001 when she raced solo non-stop around the world in the Vendée Globe when only 24 years old.
I think this is the biggest challenge by far that I've ever attempted because the boat's big and powerful. The record I'm trying to beat is effectively to try and get a boat as fast as humanly possible around the planet.
In 2005, having spent 71 days, 14 hours, 18 minutes, and 33 seconds at sea, and having sailed over 26,000 miles, she became the fastest person to circumnavigate the globe single-handedly. She is founder of the Ellen MacArthur Cancer Trust, a charity set up in 2003 which works with hospitals across the UK to take young people sailing, helping them regain their confidence after treatment for cancer and leukemia.
It makes such a difference.
The trust has saved my life. It's been absolutely amazing.
The transformation is amazing.
It just takes your mind off everything. You're doing something different. You're learning new things every day. It's just, yeah, it's really good.
Having become acutely aware of the finite nature of the resources our linear economy relies upon, she stepped away from professional sailing to launch the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in 2010. The aim of the foundation is to accelerate the transition to a restorative circular economy, working with business and education through analysis and communication. Please welcome Dame Ellen MacArthur.
Good afternoon, everyone, and to the finalists, I apologize for holding this up for a further 20 minutes. I'd like to rewind my life and begin when I was a child, because I firmly believe that when you're a child, anything and everything is possible. And in fact, the challenge is holding on to that as you grow up. And for me as a child, I had the chance to sail when I was 4 years old. I had never experienced that incredible feeling of freedom before. But as we hoisted those sails, I decided there and then that one day my goal would be to sail around the world. At that point, I had absolutely no idea how to make that dream come true, but I knew exactly where I was heading. And so as a child, I took the first steps that I could. I started saving my school dinner money change. Every day I saved the change, I put it in a tin when I'd reached £1, and when I had £100, I would go along to the Building Society and put my money in. So imagine how it felt, just 4 years after leaving school age 17, to pursue a career in sailing, to be standing in front of a CEO who I knew could make that decision as to whether or not that dream would come true. I was shaking, and I was excited. And when he said yes, it totally transformed my life. We began an 8-year sponsorship where I sailed on Kingfisher around the world, competed in 2 transatlantic races and won. And when we set about on the greatest challenge, which was to try and be the fastest person ever to sail solo non-stop around the world, these craft are very different. These are multi-hulls. Things can go wrong on multi-hulls very quickly because they go very fast. To put things in perspective, I could climb inside the mast right the way to the top. They're powerful, they're fast, and they're dangerous. This was a training sail. Nothing went wrong on that particular sail, but you can see it's quite wet. This wasn't a training sail, that was a race with 11 guys on board, and they still flipped that boat upside down. This boat's 60 feet. The one I took around the world was 75. And this boat clearly has gone upside down, and I know that story very well because I was one of the 5 little figures sitting on the hull. That took 5 seconds. I was inside getting something to eat, 2 of the guys on the deck, about to go on deck to take the helm, and then there was a little knock, and then 5 seconds later our world went black because the windows go underwater and your life quite literally is turned upside down. And it's the most scared I've ever been at sea because one of my best friends was trapped underneath the nets. And luckily he came out and all was well, but it shows how close to the edge that you're sailing. And when you're solo, you're the only one. So you sleep with the ropes in your hand, and you live in a very, very different world. And you go for these journeys which take you 3 months. If you're lucky, you see land maybe once or twice. But you're literally sailing in the middle of nowhere. And in the Southern Ocean, you are 2,500 miles away from the nearest town. And if I said to you all now, go off into Amsterdam and find everything you will need for your survival for the next 3 months, that's quite a task. Not just you, food and fuel, but the boat, the repairs, the spares, everything that you think you might need, but not too much, because you can't take anything that's heavy, because you won't break the record, because you're trying to be fast. And then when you cross that start line, it's down to you and you alone to manage what you have with you. Every packet of food, every drop of diesel, managed down to the day, down to the hour, until you cross that finish line with the record broken. And though I was not looking for it, what that taught me was the absolute definition of what the word finite really means. Because what you have on that boat is all you have. There is no more. And never in my life did I think I would ever translate what I learned at sea to our world. But it made me think of our global economy. And I suddenly realized that our global economy is no different. It's fueled using materials which are finite, and energy which is finite, in an incredibly linear way. And so I began to learn, to begin with in parallel with sailing. And I spoke to experts, scientists. I visited manufacturing plants. I visited energy plants. This was the burner of a coal-fired power station in the UK, 800 feet high, much higher than this room. Goes to 2,000 degrees in there when the coal is burning. Many of the lights in the UK are still powered by these today. And coal was a subject which was very close to my family. My great-grandfather was a coal miner. And when you see that photo, you see a really old photo. And when you see his trousers, you know it's a really old photo. Because no one today has a waistband quite that high. But actually, it wasn't that long ago, because that's me with my great-grandfather. He was a coal miner. He told me the stories. He talked about the ponies he worked underground with, and the fact that when the miners retired, they would save the crusts of their sandwiches, and they would give, when the ponies retired, the miners would save the crusts of their sandwiches, and they would give these crusts to the ponies when they left the pits at the end of their shift. The camaraderie was quite extraordinary. And on this journey, one place I went to was the World Coal Association. This was years ago. And there on the homepage, it said, we have about 118 years of coal left. And I remember seeing the figure thinking, wow, that's more than the figures we hear about oil. But actually, that's also well outside my lifetime. And then I thought, well, actually, how long is 118 years? And I did the maths. And I worked out that my great-grandfather had been born exactly 118 years before that year. And I sat on his knee till I was 11 years old. And it's nothing, absolutely nothing in time. It goes like that. And that made me make that decision I never ever thought I would make, which was to leave the sport of solo sailing behind me and focus on a much greater challenge. How can our global economy function moving forwards? And you realize it's not just energy, it's also materials. Metals, plastics, polymers, these things we only have once in the history of humanity. 2008 New Scientist report, quite out of date now, but one of those things I picked up on that journey. And it talks about materials, 40 years of silver, 40 years of zinc, 13 years of indium. No one knows exactly how long we've got these materials for, but we do know we don't make them anymore. We just have them once, and we're using them faster and faster. The speed at which we're using these materials is increasing. We're seeing curves that you saw briefly there go up faster and faster and faster. And we know one thing, that based on finite materials, there is absolutely no way that that line can go vertical. And when you look at these statistics, and you look at the fact that we saw a century of price declines erased in 10 years, you realize that ultimately some of our industries, our economies, are really running up against limits. Next slide, please. Maybe we don't have a next slide. And to put this into context, we saw your average European car manufacturer between January 2011 and January 2012 see a raw material price increase, stuff they have to buy for their business model to function, of 500 million euros in 12 months. Now, these figures can't just be lost within the accounts. They have to be passed on to the consumer. But ultimately, what's this model that can work in the long term? And when you think about the way our economy functions, it's actually very linear. It's like a conveyor belt. We take something out of the ground, we make something out of it, and then ultimately it gets thrown away. Now, some of it does get recycled, but it's not designed for that purpose. We get out what we can at the end of the life of something. We don't design for a system. And you could call that a linear economy. An economy which is effectively a straight line. Things go in one end and they come out the other. And you think about how we can challenge a linear economy. What can we do about the system? And so much of the conversation was about we need to be efficient. We have finite resources. We need to be efficient. We need to use less. We need to be efficient with the way we make things. We need to make cars with 10% less material every year if we could. We need to make them with 10% less energy every year if we can. Of course, that's vital. We have a finite supply. But vital in the transition to what? Because if we carry on in that linear fashion, no matter how efficient we are, we're running a linear system. 10 years down the line, you make no cars with no energy, no materials, and there's no industry. And what fascinated me was, where are we heading? What does success look like? What can the economy function like? And actually, I then began a new journey, meeting new people who thought in a very different way. And one of those people was here in Holland, a Dutch CEO called Stef Kranendijk, the CEO of Desso, a Welsh education expert, a German scientist, Michael Braungart, with Bill Madonna, had done a huge work on cradle to cradle. Industrial symbiosis came in there, biomimicry came in there, people thinking a different way. Take Stef's business. He didn't say, we want to build a more efficient carpet tile. He said, I want to design a different system. I want to design a carpet tile that's made to be made again. I want to design it so we get it back, because I want it back. I'd actually rather lease it rather than sell it, because I want to guarantee I can get those materials back out of it. And I'm going to build a system to do so. And I'll work with a yarn supplier so they can depolymerize, repolymerize the yarn, and put that into the next carpet. And suddenly you see a system that functions in a very different way. What if you applied that to tables? What if you applied that to vehicles? What if you applied that to buildings? What if you applied that to the entire economy, including the biosphere? What if you could create anything that was biological so that it flowed within a system? So we have the system made so that food waste, human waste, agricultural waste, food production waste, all flowed into a system. And we could cycle that material so it flowed into the economy, keeping all materials at their highest value at all times. And that you could call a circular economy, a different economic model in its entirety. And suddenly, I had that feeling that I had when I was a little girl. I could see something that we could aim for, something that actually could function. And it massively inspired me. And not just me, but when we set out on the journey in 2008 to find funding for the launch of the foundation in September 2010, that also inspired businesses, because they too knew that their linear model couldn't run in the long term. Business is fundamentally challenged by that linear system. And so when we launched the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in September 2010, we launched it with the goal to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And in doing so, we believed that working with the best players in the global economy and some of the greatest thinkers was the best way to accelerate change. We chose to work in 3 areas: with business, with education, and on analysis and insight. And one of the first things we did was went to the management consultants, McKinsey, and we asked them 3 questions, all based on accelerating that transition to a circular economy. Does the circular economy have the potential to decouple growth from resource constraints? Is it good for business? And is it good for the wider economy? And to begin with, we drew a framework. So what does the circular economy look like? Well, you have the technosphere on the right, the carpets, the cars, the materials. On the left, you have the biosphere, materials you can cascade using multiple times through the economy before you burn them or you biodegrade them to create biogas and fertilizer. So we split the economy into 2. And then we looked at where the value lay, what a technosphere could look like. It's not just being able to cycle the materials, but the products themselves, the components within them. We're talking about decomponentization, remanufacturing. And the answer to all 3 questions was yes. And what's interesting is, this was, to answer question 1, we could see that the unaccounted going to landfill went from 85% to 50%. So it did begin to decouple growth from those resource constraints. So we had the answer yes. And actually, if you look at the outer loop on the right-hand side, we call recycling almost the loop of last resort. Because although it's economically viable and absolutely the right thing to do, there is a huge amount of value which sits within that, in remanufacture, reselling, and decomponentization. Second question, is it good for business? Yes. It was better for business and better for the consumer. Within the circular economy, the user would have the use of a washing machine for 12 cents rather than the 27 cents that we currently pay per wash when we buy a low-end machine. And the manufacturer makes more money because they're not having to buy new raw materials every time they provide us with a service. So we don't pay tax when we buy the machine, we don't pay tax when we throw it away, and we don't buy the materials within the washing machine when we have use of that product. We purely pay per wash, which shifts the economics hugely. The final question, is it good for the economy? Yes, $630 billion US. This was the EU economy, and it was medium complexity goods, goods that cycle in more than 1 year, less than 10. We then looked at consumer goods, faster moving consumer goods. What was the value of those to the global economy? And we found actually that was a fascinating topic, because of the $3.2 trillion US global market, we only recover 20% by value. $67 billion US of textiles lost the economy every year. And there's huge value in this stuff, but it's not set into a system when it's created. We don't have the material flows in place to recover the value. 1 ton of food waste, $6 of fertilizer, $18 of heat, $26 of electricity. We looked at, could you replace global current fertilizer use if you collected human waste, agricultural waste, food production waste, and food waste? And we found that actually, if you could, and we're by no means there today, you could replace current chemical fertilizer use by 2.7 times. And we got a top-line figure of $706 billion US per year. So we ended up with 3 reports after a partnership with the World Economic Forum. The first 2 we launched at the World Economic Forum together with McKinsey and our global partners, and the 3rd report we did in conjunction with the World Economic Forum, because they're an incredible convener, and it's an amazing platform to launch ideas from. So last year we had a $1 trillion US opportunity, and we set up a 2-year project bringing together World Economic Forum, McKinsey, ourselves, and some of the greatest CEOs of the big businesses who are thinking differently to try and find the stalemates or the bottlenecks within the economy and physically try and unlock those within 2 years. So business, we have our global partners who all run circular economy programs, which are building on a year-by-year basis. But also we have a platform created with very much the consent of our global partners, because we realize this has to happen faster. This isn't about 5 organizations working in this space, it's about scaling. So we created the Circular Economy 100, we now have 90 members, and that brings together education, it brings together regions, it brings together big corporates, and it brings together small emerging innovators, which is exactly what we're seeing here today. Different thinking being injected into the global economy, being shared with the likes of Apple, H&M, IKEA, huge corporates who are within this mix, talking to the smaller dynamic companies, which is why here this event is so inspiring to see these people coming up with different ideas and driving them into the economy. So personally, it's hugely inspiring to be here. We work with some of the best universities in the world, linking them into business. We work with International Baccalaureate on the education side, because the idea inspires young people. It's something to go to very quickly. It's an inspirational model. And we're also running for the first time an experiment, a disruptive innovation festival. 4 weeks online, sharing ideas around the circular economy from all over the world. We've got some fantastic keynote speakers with the idea of stimulating exactly that same innovation that exists here today, and we see in entrance to this challenge, and we'd very much like to think that that festival can help deliver more and more entrants, sorry to the prejudges, for this event next year, because the thinking really is extraordinary, and we can draw these ideas from all over the world. And so just to finish, just a few examples of what a circular economy looks like in the global marketplace. Michelin, in our C100, they don't sell tires to trucks. You pay per mile. It's a totally different business model. You change the system, you turn a business model into a service whereby people then return the tires get remanufactured and put back on the trucks. Renault, if you buy an electric car from Renault, you don't buy the battery. You get it replaced when it's done a certain number of hours. You buy the vehicle, they replace the battery. You never have to worry about your engine. You pay a service charge for the battery. It goes back to them, so they remanufacture it. So you're creating the material flow of something very expensive, which is the lithium. Renault also remanufacture engines, gearboxes, fuel pumps from the entire Renault network right across Europe. They take them into a plant just outside Paris, where they ultrasonically clean them, they disassemble them, they reassemble them, and they leave that factory in a box saying genuine Renault parts with the same warranty as a genuine Renault engine, tested to the same level, but we buy that for much less. And at present, that is Renault's most profitable factory in the entire world, because they're not having to source that same number of raw materials, because they're coming in the form of engines to be remanufactured. And when an engine goes out of the door, it only has 20% of the energy embedded in it when you compare that to a brand new engine. Turn 2 here in Holland, amazing inspirational work going on here, whereby if you have a Turn 2 contract and you're looking for lighting in your office, you don't buy the lights. you pay to have 400 lumens at desk height. Turn 2 provide the service, they work with Philips, Philips provide the lights, Philips pay the electricity, so actually when they have a more efficient lighting system, they change it, they take their lights back, they then can remanufacture them, it's their material, so they can reprocess into their new lights, and actually we don't worry about that. It drives innovation and it drives creativity. And when we talk about innovation and creativity, bolts, that when you put at a certain temperature, the thread disappears, so you can remove the nuts. Circuit boards that dissolve in a certain temperature of water. Bags that when you dissolve them disappear and can disappear into our waste system because they actually become nutrient. There's nothing toxic in there. They're designed to fit within the biological system. And we find it drives innovation and creativity. You know, what design brief today says we need this product to be biological and fit within the biocycle? Or we need this washing machine to be designed for disassembly? It's an entirely different way of thinking. Splosh provide cleaning products for your home. You buy a kit with all the bottles, and then the refills come through the post. There's someone putting a refill in there. You drop it in, you add hot water. Not only the material within the refill turns into your product, but the case of it also becomes the product. So there's no plastic packaging left once that little sachet has dissolved. Again, a very different model. You don't go to the supermarket to buy them either, because they post the refills to your door. Eben, with a covetive, growing packaging, innovation, things that some of us could never even think of. Others not only think of, but actually bring to the marketplace. Incredible innovations, both in the technosphere and the biosphere, which is hugely motivating for young people moving forwards in the global economy. And I'd just like to end, as I have 45 seconds to go, on why I think that this is possible. Because when you try and shift a global economy from linear to circular, it is a massive challenge. I would be the first to say, I think it's the greatest challenge that I've ever come across. But I look back at the life of my great-grandfather. When he was born, there were 25 cars on the road in the entire world. They'd only just been invented. When he was 14, we flew for the first time in history. He remembered that. He talked to me about that. When he was 40, we built the first computer. Many said it wouldn't catch on, but it did. And just 20 years later, we turned a room full of kit into a tiny microchip. And now there'll be thousands of them in our pockets and our IT equipment here today. We built a mobile phone 10 years later. Not that mobile, certainly not that portable, and definitely not a smartphone. But it began to revolutionize connectivity. And in developing countries, we've put entirely different infrastructure in because we've had the technology enabled. We can do things in a different way. And 10 years before my great-grandfather left this earth, the internet arrived. If ever there is a time we can do this, and today is the greatest example of that, it's now. Because we really can rethink the future and build a new economy. Thank you.